Well, this is one way to start the new year. We had the wheel bearing catch fire, burn up, disappear, and we're stuck in the middle of nowhere in South Carolina. So much for greasing the bearings, I guess.
Good morning, my faithful viewers. If this is your first time on this channel and you're just looking for a video on axle repair, you can get that here. But if you're going to understand what I'm talking about, you might want to look at some of my other A-liner repair videos so you can get the idea of my humor, because I may be saying things that don't really make sense. Hopefully we'll keep you from making a major mistake on your camper. This is applicable to any trailer. We'll go over some of the things with the trailers, okay? So this is a torsion axle, and it worked by this part going up and down. Inside here there are springs, rubber springs actually, that dampen it going up and down, and that lever goes up and down over bumps. But every axle on a trailer is pretty much the same. You have a spindle that the wheel and brakes and whatever attached, and they ride on that spindle with bearing. And this one unfortunately has been out in the rain for a week, so it's got a little rust spot on it, but that'll just really wipe right off. Now, you may have brakes on the back of yours, and they just bolt into this flange like that, only they're big and heavy and metal. And these are the brake shoes, and they're bolted to the axle. And then you will have a hub, which is the brake shoe or the brake housing to go over that. So it's a little different than mine, but the principle is the same. The bearings are going to be in this part, whether it has the brake drum on it or disc or whatever that is, but the bearings are going to be inside here. I do not have brakes on mine. I have a bare naked hub like that. The wheel goes right on that, and I drive very carefully knowing that I may have to stop it. Now, you may have an axle that goes all the way across straight, but it's going to be the same thing on a trailer. Now on a car it's different. One thing that I neglected to recognize was the amount of oil that was leaking out of my hubs on the tires. And this blackness around the rim of the tire tells me that my bearings were probably overheating, turning the grease into oil and slinging it outside of the bearings. This is the hub that did not disintegrate. This was still working, and you can see it has some grease in there and it's a mess, but you can see that it was leaking past the seal. And you can see also that these are the bearings that are in here. This is a lot of grease, and the bearings are still inside this hub. And if I clean some of this grease off, so there you can see the seal on the other one, and the bearings are down inside here, nicely greased. And so this hub, while it had grease leakage, I always had enough grease in there to maintain the bearings. And you can see there's grease down inside here that's keeping these bearings, and you can see the bearing move, okay? And we'll take those out of there and see if they're any good. This was the door side, and I kept a pretty good eye on it, and I must have missed greasing the other side once. Let's just talk about grease for a second. These are two different kinds of bearing. The green, which is known as extra heavy duty, and red, which is known as red and tacky. The green is a urea based grease, and that's it's got good specs, it's a good grease, and that's what I've used for the last 10 years in my camper. But since it's failed me and I can't find it, I'm changing to the red grease, which is the red and tacky. And you can get these data sheets online from the grease company. These are Lucas greases. My opinion, which says that Lucas grease has some really good grease, and you can see that dropping point in Fahrenheit is 540 degrees. The dropping point on the green and tacky is 500 degrees right there. So I think the red and tacky might be a little more durable for high heat situations. So we're going to move over to the red and tacky. But since they can't be mixed, it means I had to buy an all new grease gun, and I've got to make sure that there's none of that grease in the axle. Let's go out and look at the axle and make sure that axle is nice and clean. So the spindle on our axle has this Zerk fitting, and that Zerk fitting is for adding grease to the bearings, and this locks on there, and you can see I'm going to give this a pump, and since this was probably red hot, it probably boiled all the axle, all the grease out. And this is where it comes out, way down over here is where the grease comes out. So you can see right there, that grease is coming out that hole. And this is behind the back bearing. The back bearing goes to this shoulder here. And this is the seal for the grease to maintain inside the axle, or spindle, whatever you want to call it. But now I want to make sure that all the grease that's in this spindle is all that red grease. So I'm going to give it a couple of pumps to make sure that I don't have any extra grease. So I'm in good shape. I can now put my new bearings and my new grease and everything all in there, and it should be fine. If you're taking your old nasty bearings and putting them back in, you can do that to get all the old grease off. And one of the best ways to do that is to throw it in a bucket of kerosene. Just enough to cover it over. Now, a lot of the solvents you buy might actually dissolve toothbrush teeth. I have a brass bristle brush here. All right, I think that looks pretty good. And the castle nut is the key to making sure the bearings are not in too tight, because of course bearings should float in grease. They should not be jammed up against the end of the spindle. They won't work. They'll make too much friction, and then they'll get too hot, eat the oil or the grease, and they'll fall apart. And there the castle nut looks pretty good. Okay, so that's clean. And the bearing. Now we got our bearing pretty much all clean, and we'll put our fingers in it and we'll spin it. It spins pretty good. I don't see any broken bearings or cracked, or I mean, these look pretty good. So I will save these for emergency use only. There is still a bit of, see, it's supposed to have a little wobble in there, not a ton, and definitely not so much that they could come out, but it's a loose bearing. They should float on the grease. They should not be stuck. So the bearing looks really good, and apparently I had enough grease in this for the longest time. See, the way to clean the bearings really is to blow them out with compressed air, but that's kind of dangerous and it's not necessary. Just make sure that the bearing is completely dry before you put new grease in it. Now, while the bearing is back there still soaking in kerosene to get that grease out of it, this is how you get grease into them. Now, the old way is to put a big glob of grease in your palm and then smack the bearing into it. You have to smack it hard and just the very edge of the grease, and that will force the grease up into the bearing. You can buy these universal bearing packers, and really just two little funnels and a Zerk fitting. You screw this into the bottom one, and you see the hole that's right there. Put the bearing on here. Then you screw this one on the top, on there like that. Put it in there like that. And that will center the bearing. And you can see it in there. And the grease gun goes on the Zerk. And we just pump grease into that little bugger. I don't see any grease in the bearing yet. Okay, I could see the cap is getting full, so I'm looking at it, and there's grease all the way around the bottom. So that went through the top and out the bottom. So with all that grease in there, let's take this apart and see what the bearing looks like. Well, as you can see, there's a lot of grease through the edge of the bearing, and there's a lot of grease in the cup. But the middle of this has no bearing to it. These are closed on the inside. So the thing we have to do with this now is get some of this grease. We have to get some of this grease on the outside of the bearings out here where they really need to be, and pushed into the inside. But I think we did get pretty good grease into the center of the bearing by using that thing. Push some of that grease around the outside and over those bearings. Since I'm going to believe that that's pretty well pack. I'm going to put that in the hub. Well, after some careful nudging and tapping and a little extra impatience, we got the seal to go in there. So the inner bearing is there. The grease is in there for the inner bearing. We can put this on here. We put the nut on and tighten it as hard as we could tighten it. Rotated the hub once or twice, then backed it out a quarter turn, and the hub turns real nice now. Although this red grease is a lot thicker, tackier than the stuff I had in there. We'll see if this affects my mileage, because this doesn't turn as much as it was. I mean, it doesn't turn any better even with the nut not on there. So and then we got it where we wanted it, and we locked it with the cotter pin. Cotter pin goes this way, and so we got that in and bent it up so it won't come out. Then we put our grease gun on and filled it with grease. And what you're doing is you're filling the entire inside of this hub with grease. So you're putting probably a full cup of grease in there, and then eventually it'll start oozing out, and you want to be turning this as you're filling it, otherwise it'll just blow out the back. But you want to turn it, and you can see it's still kind of moving. It's still kind of pressurized in there, so it's still moving to the front, and it'll fill this cap once we get this cap on and go for a ride. But just I think I got it going. So it's nice light taps, and it'll go in. And you can see the oils, the grease is coming out around it, so I know it's almost on the top, as tight as I want it, and it will be done. It's done. So that's sealed. And it turns, and all we got to do is put the wheel on it and get it off those jack stands. Back on its own wheels. What a week. Well, folks, that was quite a project. And I mean, think how long it took me to do this. I brought the trailer home on the 1st of the year. Today's the 17th. Realistically, I've been pretty sick. I couldn't work on it for maybe 4 or 5 days, but I had to get parts anyways. So this is a job that's going to take you a couple weeks. I don't know if anybody owns these. This is probably a pretty good trailer tool to have. It's an infrared thermometer. You point it at something and it gives you a temperature, and people generally will point it at their hub to see how hot they get, and if they get above 200 or 300 degrees, you know you're going to have trouble with your grease. Your grease is going to be melting in there and your bearings are going to fail. Keep an eye on your bearings, keep an eye on your hubs, keep an eye on your brakes, but don't let this happen to you. But if it does, it's just a repair. It's not a big deal. I think the total cost to me, including the trip back here, is around $500. Now, brand new axle, I was going to replace the whole axle, but the brand new axle was $795 plus shipping, so that would have been about $1,000. If a dealer did it, it probably would have been $3,000. So not a bad job. The total, if I had gotten this home and realized the bearings were bad and had to change the bearings without any problem. Just new bearings, new hub, new races, new everything. In my opinion, that's what you need to do. If you're got a bad bearing, change the whole hub. These hubs were $62, you know, with the bearings and everything. So it's good money on Amazon. Link in the description below. But to have peace of mind and brand new parts. All right, folks. If you thought this was worthwhile watching, give me a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, think about subscribing. I have lots of good trailer maintenance hints and great places to go and great trips. Thanks for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe, share. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.